Hello and welcome to another edition of Issues and Interviews with Kieran Michael Lalor on the Hudson Power Broker YouTube channel. You know, we used to do this show on the radio. It used to be on 3 radio stations. COVID knocked that out of the box, but we improvised, adapted, and overcame. And here we are. We're doing this as a video podcast, an audio podcast, and nobody's really covering New York politics and in particular Hudson Valley politics from a conservative perspective, but we are. I am. And I hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel. It takes exactly 2.5 seconds, and you can help us spread our word and get information out there that the regular press here in New York and in the Hudson Valley is never going to give you. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check it out all the time. We're going to have about 3 shows a week. We're going to have this show. We're going to have an interview show that I'll do at the end of the week, and we're going to have Politics with Powers in the middle of the week with correspondent Andy Lee Powers. So definitely check it out, subscribe, watch it, share it on your social media, and spread the word. Okay, we're in a crazy time. And if you're a right of center person, if you're an independent-minded person that wants to get a different perspective than you're getting in the New York Times and the Poughkeepsie Journal and on Cable Vision News 12 and LoHUD, then support us. Support us. You can support us by subscribing and sharing on your social media. Now, let's get right into the issue of the day. And the issue of the day I think it's the issue of the year, actually. Maybe the pandemic, I think, is what 2020 will be known for. But in terms of an issue, law enforcement, the war on cops, as many people, including myself, have called it, is going on in 2020. And it's having repercussions all over the state of New York and all over the country, really. But in New York City, probably most acutely because you have a city of 8 million people and the war on cops is raging. Now, from a political perspective, I always defended Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. I always defended her. People say, she's so dumb. She sounds like an airhead. And I said, she's savvy. She is savvy. She is smart. Watch out for her. Well, you definitely should watch out for her. But I learned this week, she is not as smart as I gave her credit for. I never thought she was particularly knowledgeable. I knew she was wrong on all of the issues just about. But I thought she had some moxie and some smarts. And let's face it, she was elected as, Jenny from the block in the Bronx and Queens, pretending like she's been there her whole life. And she lived in, a beautiful northern Westchester community, went to a beautiful upper middle class high school, Yorktown High School. If you've ever been down, it's a beautiful, beautiful area there. In Yorktown, the high school is beautiful. I've been there many times. It's only about a half an hour for me. So she does have some savvy. And if you're not, you're not concerned with the truth, it's easy to pull that kind of stuff off. But she came off like her critics have always portrayed her this week. Let's take a look at a clip.
Do we think this has to do with the fact that there's record unemployment in the United States right now? The fact that people are at a level of economic desperation that we have not seen since the Great Recession? Maybe this has to do with the fact that people aren't paying their rent and are scared to pay their rent. And so they go out and they need to feed their child and they don't have money. So you maybe they're put in a position where they feel like they either need to shoplift some bread or go hungry that night.
Okay, see what I mean? AOC. Murders aren't spiking because people are hungry. A little girl walking down the street last week with her father holding his hand wasn't murdered because some guy was hungry for some bread to feed himself and his family. It had nothing to do with that. In fact, what's kind of ironic is she talks about unemployment being high. Yeah, the unemployment number is high, but because of the stimulus and whatever you think of it from a fiscal responsibility point of view, maybe it had to be done, maybe it didn't, maybe it didn't have to be as big, time will tell. But there's a lot of people, including in AOC's district, and I know this from friends who own businesses in the Bronx, they're making more money than ever. They're basically making about $1,100 while they're on unemployment. They're counted as an unemployment statistic, but they're making about $1,100 a week with the pandemic funds from the federal government and the regular $500 and change of unemployment. So they're not working, but they're putting $1,100 a week in their pocket. Not too shabby. So I don't know why you'd need to be stealing bread. The other thing I thought was funny that she said in that clip there, they're afraid to pay their rent. Now, I pay a mortgage now, but in my life, I've paid a rent, and I never enjoyed paying my mortgage or rent, but I was never afraid to pay my rent. And let's say I was afraid, and I didn't pay my rent. I'd have more money to buy bread and I wouldn't have to shoplift it, as AOC seems to think is going on here. And what she's saying is basically she's saying the police are liars, part of the war on cops, discredit the cops, embolden criminals to oppose the cops, both rhetorically and physically in the streets, as we have seen more and more. But let's talk about a couple of incredible statistics from the year 2020. She's saying, "Oh, we throw $6 billion a year at the New York City Police Department. It hasn't been defunded yet. Those cuts that were talked about, the $1 billion cut the city council and the mayor passed a week or so ago, they haven't even been fully implemented, if they've been implemented at all. And despite this huge budget, we still have this big crime wave. And it's not bail reform. And it's not the liberal policies out of Albany." Well, let's talk about the numbers. The deadly numbers, which are primarily, almost exclusively impacting poor people and primarily impacting people of color. This year, we're halfway through the year, pretty much. Murder is up 23%. Murder is up 23%. Shooting victims, the number of shooting victims in New York City, up 70%. Almost double the number of people being shot in New York City. And I don't think it's because of the pandemic. I don't think it's because of unemployment and economic challenges posed by the pandemic. Here's another incredible statistic, which might speak to why violence and murders are going through the roof. Right now, 28% of shootings, the police get an arrest. That's half of what it normally is. Usually it's around 60%. If there's a shooting, 60% chance the police are able to arrest somebody. Right now in 2020, it's 28%. So 2 out of 3 shooters in New York don't get arrested. Think about that. Think about more crimes. If you're willing to shoot somebody in New York City, imagine what other crimes you're going to be able to perpetrate. You shoot somebody and you don't even get arrested. You get away with it. Boy, you're going to take your chance again with another crime or perhaps another shooting. Let's go back. I remember the bad old days. I remember the bad old days of New York City, some of Ed Koch, and it really spiraled out of control when I was a kid under David Dinkins. And in 1990, this is a stunning statistic. In 1990, murders in New York City, 2,245 murders in 1990. Let's fast forward 3 decades. Let's fast forward to last year. 318 murders. Obviously, every life lost is a loss and a tragedy. But we went from 2,245 and over 30 years, 318, down to 318. And what changed? Why did that happen? Did it just happen because of the fluke? No. A tough mayor, Rudy Giuliani, came in. Tough police commissioners, Ray Kelly, Bernie Kerik, Bratton, and they had what was called broken windows policing. And it came from the concept that if you have a neighborhood and you have a broken window and you don't fix it right away, pretty soon you're gonna go from 1 broken window to six or 7 broken windows, and the neighborhood is going to start to spiral downward. And it's the same thing with crime under this premise, which is proven over the last 30 years. That's how you go from more than 2,000 murders in a city down to 300 and something murders. And the way it works in crime is if you arrest the pickpocket, if you arrest the turnstile jumper, if you arrest the people for relatively minor crimes, don't arrest them for no reason, but if they commit a crime, rather than looking the other way, if you arrest them for the small things, you are getting off the street somebody who is going to eventually commit a big crime, a violent crime, a robbery, or something more serious. That has proven to be very successful. It has saved lives. And you know what? Predominantly saved Black lives in New York City, to use a phrase there. That's a fact. You can not like Rudy Giuliani. You can not like the NYPD. What they've done over the last 30 years with policing, what they've done has saved the lives of African Americans and people of color. Thousands of them. Thousands of people are alive today, poor people, people of color, because of these policing policies. And ironically, the AOCs and the left, they call it mass incarceration. The only way you get mass incarceration is if you have massive crime and you have a law enforcement agency and a justice system that prosecutes those crimes with the accused getting all the due process rights that every American is guaranteed and going through our system. That's how you get to so-called mass incarceration. If there wasn't massive crime, there'd be no mass incarceration. They make it sound like mass incarceration comes first. It was just a roundup of people and we put people in jail. No, we took bad people off the streets. The numbers showed it. The crime went down. Murders went down dramatically. And it's because of the police. The police department in every city, and in New York City in particular, is a force for life saving. It is the defender and the savior of Black lives. It is. The statistics prove that. And very important to point out in all these conversations, and I've even seen Republicans mess this up and be dishonest about this, I 100% reject the premise that there's systematic racism in the United States in 2020 and systematic racism in law enforcement in 2020. If you look at New York City and most big cities, it's a majority police department. There are more minority police officers than there are white police officers on the New York City Police Department job. If you look at Chicago, for example, they have a black mayor, a black police chief, and a black district attorney, all females, by the way. And they still have a horrible crime wave, probably worse than we have here in New York. And if we don't reject that premise and we allow that premise, as Winston Churchill said, another one they hate, and they'll tear down Winston Churchill statues, he said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. If we accept that premise that there's systematic racism in law enforcement, that opens the door to abuse of the police. And when the police are abused by the community and they don't get the backing of the politicians, and a lot of Republican politicians haven't been backing up our brave law enforcement officers, when that happens, you get what 5 years ago was dubbed the Ferguson effect. You get less proactive policing. You get police officers who go in and take a report after a crime has been committed, and maybe they try to find the perpetrator after the crime is committed, but the crime has already been committed. The victim has already been victimized. Proactive policing, which is what broken windows was, it's what we used to do. It's how we went from more than 2,000 murders in a year down to 300 murders a year. It prevents those kinds of things in huge, huge numbers. So AOC is saying it's unemployment and the economic displacement of the pandemic that is causing the crime wave. Horrible. A one-year-old shot and killed in New York City this week. I can't even wrap my brain around that. I can't even comprehend what that family is going through and what that community is going through. But if you back off the police and you still tell them they can't be proactive, and when they put their necks on the line, and some kind of an ugly video shows, I'm not talking about brutality, I'm not talking about George Floyd, but to subdue someone and arrest someone, sometimes it takes some physical altercations to do that. And we've empowered and trained police officers to do that. But if you tell them, hey, if you do your job and get bad guys off the street, you're going to be accused. You're going to be standing before the judge. You're going to be facing jail time. Well, I'm going to become, if I'm a police officer, I'm going to become much more of a report taker than I am a proactive police officer who's trying to proactively prevent crimes from happening. So here's why there's a crime wave. Number one, it is bail reform and discovery reform. Even if the statistics say, well, not that many people let out on bail are committing crimes. There are some. The statistics do say that. It's not a huge percentage of them. But remember what bail reform did. If I arrest someone and he's going to be back out on the street in an hour, I'm going to be less likely to arrest that person in the first place. So that person who committed a minor crime, the police officer didn't want to go through the effort and go through the process and risk his life and risk his career and his reputation to arrest somebody on a relatively minor crime when that person is going to be out of jail in an hour or two and be given METS tickets to make sure that he makes his court date. Well, that's not going to show up in the statistics, but it's going to increase crime. And remember, bail reform wasn't just bail reform. It should always be called criminal justice reform because there are all these discovery reforms, which are, many of them are witness intimidation reforms. And what they do is they give the witness information over to the defense attorney. So if I'm a witness, might commit a crime and I'm in a tough neighborhood, maybe I'm not going to come forward and be that witness. And that person never gets arrested. And that person is still on the street. It's not going to show up in the statistics of those impacted by bail reform who commit crimes, but it's going to add to the crime wave. We also disbanded the anti-crime union. The liberals all say, it's a gun problem. It's a gun problem. We got to get We got to get guns off the street. Well, we had an anti-crime unit. It was a plainclothes unit. It prevented crimes all over the city, played a big role in driving down that murder number from more than 2,000 down to 300. We disbanded it a month ago because there was rioting in the street, because a bad cop did something horrible in Minnesota. We disbanded the police unit that was getting guns off the streets. We did. It sounds insane, but that's exactly what we did. That's how we reacted to it. We tried to appease the mob, which never works. The mob can never be appeased. They can never be satisfied. Nothing we do will ever make a mob happy. That's what makes them the mob. But we tried that as a policy, and a crime wave ensued. And there's a million different factors. It's the totality of the circumstances that leads to these things. And it's all those things we've talked about in this conversation that are leading to this crime wave. And it's not, so I'll say this again, it is not people who are trying to steal some bread, like it's the play Les Miserables. Les Miserables. It's not that, AOC. And you disappointed me, AOC. I was always defending you for the last 2 years since you came on the scene saying you're smart. I had to say you're not. And watch this last clip. This last clip will blow you away. And there's been a lot of talk about this town hall that AOC did, and what she said about the stealing bread. But most media outlets, I think every media outlet, has missed this clip. Watch this clip. Check this out.
Wait, but they just released data a couple weeks ago that showed that out of almost all the people who have been found to have kind of committed crimes, etc.
I don't know what it means to kind of committed a crime, etc. Kind of committed a crime. What does that mean? Kind of committed a crime. You either committed a crime or you didn't commit a crime. And there's a crime wave going on. That's the whole point of this conversation. So this isn't a situation where, we got some people in New York City that kind of committing crimes, etc., as AOC brilliantly said there. Come on, AOC. These are the people you represent. These are the people who sent you to Washington, and your advocacy against the police, your ridiculous take on the crime wave is going to get your constituents killed. It's going to get them victimized. It's going to decrease their quality of life. Do what's right for your people, AOC. Stand up for your people. Get rid of the left-wing crazy talking points and do what's right for your people. Support the police. Support proactive policing. And the people you represent some of them will be alive who would otherwise be killed, and they'll have a better life. All right, that's it for this Issues and Interviews with Kieran Michael Lalor on the Hudson Power Broker channel. Check us out on social media, YouTube. Definitely subscribe. Definitely like us on Twitter. Definitely follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And check it out and share it with your friends. Thanks so much for joining me today.